Hi, this is the knowledge test for homeostasis and response. Right, so question number 1, what is homeostasis and what are the three main things controlled? Right, so homeostasis is where you are maintaining, or you maintain the optimal conditions for enzymes and cell functions. Okay, so homeostasis is really keeping everything kind of the same, right? So you've got stasis. Stasis kind of means keeping the same, like a static caravan. The three main things controlled are blood, glucose concentration, body temperature, and water levels. Now obviously in homeostasis itself there's a lot more kind of different things that need to be controlled, but they're the three that we need to talk about at GCSE. What are the two nervous systems? We've got the central nervous system, okay, which is basically your brain and your spinal cord, and then we've got the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so that is then all the different kind of nerves that go away from your spine. And you think about it as well, you have peripheral vision. So if I'm sat here now, what I can do is I can see things that are going on. I can't really see them, right, but that's my peripheral vision, right, where I've got a bit of observation of them. Right, the reflex arc. Now there's loads and loads and loads of different diagrams you can get for reflex arc, right? So I've used this one, right, even though if you Google you can find all sorts, right? But what you've got to be able to do is you've got to be able to know the pattern, right, the flow diagram. So it starts off over here with the stimulus. Okay, so the stimulus could be a bee, it could be hit your hand, hot plate, right? And then what you've got in your hand is you've got receptor. Okay, so the stimulus then stimulates a response from the receptor. Then what happens is it goes down this neuron there. That neuron is the sensory neuron. Okay, now it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Sensory, sensing. Then what it does is it goes all the way along that sensory neuron and it gets to this little thing here, which is then your synapse. Okay, now there's a little bit of a clue there, all right, synapse. You've also got another synapse here. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll talk about those in a minute, right, about what exactly they are. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail, right, but the synapses are important. Okay, then what we've got is we've then got this little neuron here, which is within the actual spinal cord itself, which is called the relay neuron. Okay, relay, so if you think about a running race, what you might do is you might pass the baton on, which is kind of like a relay. Then what it does is it gets to this neuron here, which is called the motor. That's a M, by the way, motor neuron. Okay, so if you think about it, sensory senses, relay passes information on, motor neuron makes you move or do something. Okay, and in this box then, what you have is you have your effector, right? And then there are two types of effectors, right? You've got a gland, which could be where a hormone is produced, or it could be in a muscle, so then you move your arm. When you've got the effector, then what you have is you have your response. Okay, so that's a reflex arc, all right, very, very rapid reaction. Now this is then the kind of a flow diagram for it, where what I've done then is I've just added in all the different steps. So, stimulus is detected by a receptor. The receptor then sends a message down the sensory neuron. In between the sensory neuron and the next neuron, there is then a synapse. Okay, then what we do is you go from the sensory neuron into the relay neuron, which is the one then that is in the spinal cord. And then here, we then have another synapse. We then go to the motor neuron. Okay, then once it gets down the motor neuron, we then have an effector. And I said before, an effector can be a muscle or it can be a gland. Then the final step is we have a response. Okay, so that's then a reflex pathway. It's very similar to the previous one, all right, but then put down as a flow diagram. Right, comparing voluntary and involuntary responses. So I'm just going to write up here voluntary, and I'm going to write up here involuntary. Okay, the words themselves kind of make sense, right? So voluntary is something that you're obviously deciding to do. Involuntary is something that you can't control, you can't decide to do. Right, so type of response is not automatic, you are aware. Right, so that is then a voluntary thing. So like me doing this video is voluntary. Type of response is automatic. Okay, and you're kind of not aware. Right, if somebody came in this room now and threw a tennis ball at me, right, I would probably catch it or move, right, but it's an automatic response, it's involuntary. Now, parts of the brain, right? Now, controlling part of the brain of the voluntary is the cerebrum. Okay, if you then write down it kind of controlled by the brain, then you'd be getting away with that. Cerebrum is more your triple science part. Controlling part of the brain is the spine, right? But for triple science, it's the medulla oblongata. Nervous pathway. Okay, so what we've got with the nervous pathway is it goes receptor to the brain to the effector. Okay, so my receptor, me doing this video, is my eyes, right? That sends a message to my brain, and then my muscles then move as an effector. In the involuntary, it starts off the same, receptor, then it goes to the spine. Let's put an arrow there as well, don't we? And then it goes to your effector. Okay, so what it's doing is it's just doing the difference is voluntary is the brain, involuntary is the spine. Speed. I'm going to just put here slow, right? Even though it isn't particularly very slow, you're talking about fractions of a second. The involuntary is fast in comparison, right? So if somebody threw a tennis ball at me, right, I would just catch it or I would dodge it, right, and I wouldn't even have to think about it. It'd be very fast. If I actually sat there and thought, oh, there's a tennis ball coming at my head, right, then it'd be a lot slower because my brain is then involved. Examples for this one could be speaking, hearing, walking. Okay, things that actually take voluntary, conscious thought. Involuntary, it could be your heart pumping. It could be peristalsis in your digestive system. And it could be your respiratory. Okay, you're not consciously breathing all the time. Now, question number 6, this is then going back to our relay neuron. It's what is a synapse? A synapse is a bit like a pocket of space between two nerve cells. Right, now that is a very, very, very simplified version of what a synapse is. Right, but realistically, now this is going to be an absolutely terrible drawing. Okay, realistically, what it is you've got an impulse that comes down a neuron. Okay, and then what happens here is at this end here, you have like neurotransmitters produced. So the impulse comes down. So the impulse comes down, electrical impulse from a stimulus. Neurotransmitters are then produced here. They're then released, and what they then do is they then pass across the gap. They're then detected in the next neuron here, and if there's enough neurotransmitter, the impulse carries on. What is the endocrine system? The endocrine system are glands that secrete chemicals called hormones. And what they do is they are directly into the bloodstream. Okay, and there's lots and lots and lots of them. Right, so what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at 6 glands and the hormones they produce. The first one is the pituitary, right? And often it's called the master gland. And what you do is you find it kind of right between your eyes, slightly higher than maybe right between your eyes, and it's the size of a pea, and it's literally maybe about 5 centimetres in. It produces quite a number of very, very important hormones. First one is growth, which controls obviously how big you grow. It produces LH, which is luteinizing hormone, right, which is the hormone that makes ovulation happen. It produces ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, which controls the amount of water, because diuresis, right, is production of water. It produces FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, which makes an egg mature. And it also produces TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which controls the thyroid. So what we'll do is then we'll talk about the thyroid. Okay, so the thyroid is found in your neck here, and doctors will often come along, if you say you're ill, they'll squeeze here, right, and if the thyroid is kind of swollen, then often it will then suggest that you are poorly. That produces thyroxine, and that controls metabolism. And so metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions within your body. Okay. Next one is pancreas. Pancreas produces 2 hormones. It produces insulin, which reduces the amount of blood glucose, and it also produces glucagon, which increases the amount of glucose in the blood. Next one is the adrenal gland, found directly above your kidneys, and that produces adrenaline, which is your fight or flight hormone. Let's go for red again. Testes. Okay, obviously in males, that produces then testosterone, right, which predominantly is the male secondary characteristics. And then we go back to blue again, we'll talk about ovary, right, and the ovary's main hormone is estrogen, okay, but then there is also progesterone produced as well. Right. Compare the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the nervous system is made up of neurons, the brain, and the spinal cord. Okay, now obviously the brain and the spinal cord is made up of neurons as well, but that's kind of fundamentally what it is. The endocrine system is made up of glands. Type of message. These are an electrical impulse. Impulse. The endocrine system is chemicals called hormones. Speed. The nervous system is very fast. We're talking about fractions of a second. The endocrine system is considerably slower. Length of effect. It's very short effect in the nervous system. And because the hormones are going around the blood, the endocrine system has a longer effect on the body. What hormone reduces glucose in the blood? Okay, we've just kind of talked about that, right? And that is then insulin. What hormone increases glucose in the blood is glucagon. Question 11. Compare type 1 and type 2 diabetes, right? Type 1 diabetes is where you cannot produce the right amount of insulin, and it's the one basically you're born with. Type 2 is where you do not produce enough insulin, don't know why I did a capital, insulin over time. Right, so basically type 1 you're born with. Type 2 is often then created as you get older in life. Treatment, right, so the treatment of type 1 diabetes is you have to inject insulin and you have to control your own levels of insulin in your body. Type 2 diabetes, what you have to do, you have to control your diet, you have to control your exercise, and you basically need to reduce your need for insulin. Because what's often happened is with type 2 diabetes, over time what you've done is you've eaten too much sugary foods, too much fatty foods, not exercised enough, and your body then has it's almost like it's worn out the amount of insulin that it can produce. And then over time, it then can't produce enough insulin, or your body doesn't get as sensitive to insulin, so you then have to control it by your own lifestyle. Question number 12. What are the 4 hormones? I can't even talk. What are the 4 hormones in the menstrual cycle, and what are their roles? Right, so I'm going to start off with follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, FSH. Talked about this before, right, from the pituitary gland. FSH, what it does is it matures an egg, right? So in an ovary, what you've got is you've got many, many follicles. FSH makes one of those follicles mature into an egg. Luteinizing hormone, I love these words, LH, okay, which is again within the menstrual cycle. And what that does is it creates ovulation, right? So FSH matures an egg, luteinizing hormone makes the egg pop out. Estrogen, what that does is it kind of maintains the uterus. And then you've got progesterone, which also maintains the uterus. Now, progesterone's main job is to maintain the uterus. Now, estrogen does have other roles as well. It does have other roles as well within the menstrual cycle, which you kind of need to look up. Question number 13, IVF, right? In vitro fertilization, which basically means in glass fertilization. So what somebody is given is they are given FSH and LH. Then eggs are produced. So what you do is you collect the eggs and they are then fertilized. Then what happens is you allow them to develop into an embryo, and then you reinsert. Okay, now if you make 8 eggs at the start, what they'll probably do is just reinsert 2, because you don't want too many eggs in there. 3 disadvantages of IVF is emotional and physical stress. The second one is the success rate is not high, right? So in a hospital or a hospital trust, there might be like 40% success rate. It could be 60%, I'm not sure exactly of the levels. You also might get multiple births. Alright, so if you're inserting 2 eggs, there's a chance that you may well get twins, right? You might get 1, you might get none, right? But there's more of a chance of getting multiple births. Give 5 physical responses of adrenaline. Okay, we talked about adrenaline before, right? So there is loads, there's probably about 10. And what you've got to do is you've got to think of, if a tiger walked in the room, how would you physically respond? It's not just a case of running away, it's a case of your pupils widen. Why? So you can get more light in. Your heart rate increases. Why? To get more blood around your body, because your muscles need the glucose and they need the oxygen. Your digestive system slows, right? So if you think about it, if you've got a tiger walking in the room, you really don't need your digestive system. It's the tiger that's actually after your digestive system. Number 4, the liver produces more energy. So what it does, it produces more, converts more glycogen into glucose. And number 5 is your breathing rate increases. Okay, so obviously to get more oxygen into your body and get rid of carbon dioxide. Right, there are a number of others that then can be included